Hello, everybody, and welcome to the West Ham Way YouTube channel. I'm here with Andy Byrne from Hammers United. Andy, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, mate. Chuffed to be on. Thanks for inviting us on. Just having a little catch up before we came on there, and it's great to be able to come on and do these things, and hopefully to, like we were saying, reach out to a few people who might not know about us or who want to know more.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic, mate. And obviously today we're going to cover a little bit about what Hammers United are about, what's your long-term aim, and sort of where do you really want to be in the next few years, obviously particularly with the current ownership. So I'm sure we'll touch on that. But first and foremost, do you want to just give a little intro about, what Hammers United are all about and what you've been up to so far?
Yeah, of course. So Hammers United are an independent supporters association, fully affiliated to the FSA. We are a relatively new association, and I think it would be fair to say that we were born out of perhaps some frustration that existed at the club, and also perhaps a situation where we had a number of different fans groups, but I think it would be fair to say that there were divides, and there wasn't a great deal of unity behind a single group or a single cause at the club. So we came about in March 2018. So we haven't been in existence for long, and our initial aim was very, very simple, and it was a kind of broad brushstroke, which was to improve things for West Ham supporters. It was no more and no less, and we were just a group of ordinary fans. A little bit off the back of what happened with the Burnley game, where we had a planned protest and people were coming together, and then it got cancelled. And I guess so, out of the kind of frustration that was lingering after that cancelled protest, one of the things that happened off the back of that was and United.
Yeah, and I do remember that fondly, the protest, and it was something that personally I said to people outside of the club and my mates, I said it was vital that we kind of make some kind of noise, because obviously, ever since we've moved to the London Stadium, it sort of feels like an error of misjudgment from the owners perhaps, and a sort of overall disappointment, not only with the sort of the team and how we've progressed, which some people would level it out and say, well, why do you as West Ham expect more than where you're at? But of course it isn't just that. There are elements to do with the stadium, and I'd probably say that overall it's the relationship with the fans. And I think particularly with this season ticket renewal debacle, and obviously you'll be well informed on that situation, but that's, for me, without knowing too much into it, was clearly another example of mismanagement and that poor relationship that they've kind of fostered with the fans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess to give everyone a little bit of insight as to how we've got to where we find ourselves today, and to talk through a few of the things that you're referring to, we're not a protest group, and we didn't, we weren't brought about to lead a protest or to manage a protest or even to go into protest. But the things that you're referring to there about the supporter experience and about how fans feel with their relationship with the club and their connection with the club, those kind of it very quickly became apparent to us that we had a great deal of frustration on our hands, and a lot of pent up anger, I would say, in some cases, from the way that supporters feel that they've been treated for a very long period of time. Now, when we first started out, we did decide to almost look at it with a clean slate, and we said, look, we're a brand new group, 2018. We haven't done anything before in terms of, like, we haven't tried to engage the club before, if that makes sense. Sorry, 2019. So initial failed process 2018, and then when we sat down was 2019.
Yeah.
And we're looking at it with a clean slate, saying, as a group, we haven't existed before. So let's see if we can make something happen that hasn't happened in the past. And so our initial operation was all around pushing for dialogue with the club. we did that for the best part of a year. That took us through to around December 2019 and crossing over into 2020, when we finally did get a little bit of a breakthrough. And we did have a meeting with the supporter liaison officer at the club. But it took the best part of a year for us to get anything other than a standardized response from the club. And that standardized response from the club was, if you'd like to enter into dialogue, you would need to join the official supporters board.
Right, okay.
And we've maintained since our inception that the official supporters board is not the way that dialogue should be constructed, with a football club. You shouldn't have a club-made construct to be the platform for dialogue with supporters. And so we had maintained that we wouldn't join that board, and that we wanted independent dialogue. That kind of takes us into early 2020, which was when I guess things really started to pick up and really started to take off in terms of membership numbers. And I have to be honest that a lot of that was because we decided to organise protests. So that really did help us grow as a group. And a lot of people wanted to be involved with those protests because they felt so strongly, not necessarily about what had happened to Hammers United in a year and the fact that we weren't getting anywhere, but people felt so strongly about what had happened to them over the course of the last 10 years with the current ownership at the club. And so organising those protests kind of propelled us into the spotlight. Have to say we were cautious. We were a little bit dubious when we were organising them. We were a bit worried. Someone said to me that, I was having a conversation with someone about the fact that we'd chosen to go ahead and organise a protest. And this other person, his point of view was, well, how can you stop it from turning into another Burnley situation? How can you stop it from spilling over into the ground? How can you stop people from going onto the pitch? How can you stop the whole movement, so to speak, from being discredited and then being back to square one? And that was something we were really concerned about at first. In his words, he said, well, you light a fire, you can't control how that carries on burning, what that takes out in its path. So we were really pleasantly surprised and really just thankful to our members and everyone who came along when the protests, first the static protest outside the Olympic Stadium, and then the stroll through the Greenway, when they were attended in the manner that they were, and also we were really pleasantly surprised with how people managed to separate the protest from the football. So over 8,000 turned up for the stroll along the Greenway, and then you wouldn't have been aware that protest took place if you were in the ground that day. And off the back of that, our credibility started to grow. We got some favourable coverage in the media, and it kind of felt like the tide was turning a little bit against the current owners. Now, obviously, COVID-19 came along, and we made a conscious decision as a group to put things on hold because, well, we just didn't feel it was right to demand people's attention at a time when people's attention was probably turning to, job issues, family issues, health issues. People couldn't visit loved ones in hospital, couldn't attend funerals, had weddings cancelled, their kids weren't going to school, They were losing their jobs. So, we made a conscious decision to put everything on hold. And that kind of brings us up to where we are now, which is over the last month or so, we've, started to put content out again. We have now been engaged in some conversations with the club over season ticket renewals. And we're starting to get, the wheels are starting to turn again. So hopefully, we can kind of pick up from where we left off in March of this year.
Yeah, I mean, you've touched on a lot of points, and obviously it's been a sort of whirlwind few years, but I think I in particular remember with the first protest, the very small, they tried to say it was small. It wasn't actually, in fact, because there was a lot of passionate fans behind there, and it was very vocal from our side. And what I was sort of impressed with was the fact that the media began to respect the credibility of the protest. And I think the issue with the Burnley spilling onto the pitch, and as good as I wouldn't say as good, but certainly something that began to get this whole movement in traction, was that the media had an opportunity to jump on it and sort of frame West Ham fans as being unreasonable, etc., etc. So it was really good to see the media, in particular on the BBC, sort of say, well, it's well done, and began to get a bit more coverage. And that was a really positive movement. And I think when we're speaking about improving the dialogue with the club, there've been a lot of false dawns in that respect. And it's something that fans, I think it was long overdue, even really since they've taken over. And it's only till we've moved that we've kind of seen the fact that the lack of fan interaction has sort of negatively impacted us going forward. But in terms of, you developing, as you say, that level of credibility, do you feel that because of the way that you've conducted yourself and because of the element that I love about it is you do what you need to do outside the ground, and you come into the ground and you support the team. Do you think that's positively impacted the way that the club are willing to sit down with you and talk about these key issues?
I don't know if it's our credibility that has led the club to sit down and talk about the issues. I have to be honest with my opinion as to why the club have come to where they are now. My gut feeling is that the club are now talking to us because they're probably not too happy with the angle that we took and the stance of our group.
Okay.
So the stance of our group, what I mean when I refer to the stance is that our members were very keen for us to adopt a stance against the current owners of the club. And I guess that the other side of that, which is connected to our credibility, is that we started to pick up a lot of numbers, people who supported that stance, and then that the media got hold of that message, and actually the media started to run with it as well. So I think that's what the club were disappointed with and didn't like. And without wishing to, this is not a criticism of anybody who's done anything similar in the past, but I know that the club has engaged with other groups in the past, and they haven't engaged with them because of their credibility, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
They've engaged with them because they felt a little bit concerned about their messaging, and they felt concerned about the numbers that they were getting to support their messaging. However, because we've positioned ourselves because we are an independent supporters group and we're not a protest movement, we were really worried about our credibility. We were really nervous about that, going into a protest, being associated with a protest, and all the potential risks that come with that. And I remember speaking about it on the protest on that first one that we ran. I mean, I know the sound wasn't great, so you might not be able to hear what I was saying, but essentially the message I was trying to get across was that I was really worried that something was going to happen, and that we're not in charge of like the actions that our members take.
Yeah.
We're not in charge of the actions that the West Ham fans take. We're literally just ordinary fans who've just kind of got together and said, we're happy to pick up the baton and to try and organise things, but what people do off the back of what we organise is their own choice. They do whatever they want, and people are angry and they're really, really, really frustrated with what's going on at the club, and so yeah, we were worried that actually that protest could be the end of the road for us, because if we'd have organised it and our credibility had been damaged, we might have never have got to where we are today in terms of, I guess you would say status is maybe the right word, in terms of the status that we have amongst perhaps it might be a relatively small section of the fan base, but a status that we have where people do seem to trust us, and where the media have seemed to listen to our messaging. So we never would have got there if the protest had have turned ugly, let's say.
Yeah, and I suppose that is always the risk, isn't it? Because obviously these tensions have built up over a prolonged period of time, and you're trying to find an avenue that you can express those, but equally in a way that's productive. And even from their stance, I guess they haven't been the most productive, even with coming forward and speaking about West Ham fans. So that can only add to the kind of tension between us and them, as it seems. And I think that's a sort of pertinent point to touch on, the fact that for a number of years now, it has felt like us and them. And what I personally can't understand, and why I think it's really good that Hammers United are doing what they're doing, is it is a two-way relationship. It's not a sort of, we'll tell you what's going to happen. And obviously that sort of spilled over with the season ticket renewals, where it was a case of you pay the money up front and that's it, or you lose your season ticket. And for me, as a club as big as West Ham, with such a massive fan base, that's such a bad stance to take. Well, I just want to know your thoughts on it in terms of just how they sort of project themselves, really.
Yeah, I would agree that it does feel a little bit like us and them. And I think that, I mean, I mentioned this on the podcast yesterday with Knees Up Mother Brown. I've probably said it quite a few times, but it comes down to communication in my eyes. And the way that somebody communicates tells you a lot about them, I think, as a person or as a business person or whatever it might be. And the way that our club communicates, it leads me to form an opinion, and this is only my own personal opinion, but it leads me to form an opinion that the people who are behind that communication don't really care about my experience as a supporter. And then that makes me feel, if that's their kind of point of view towards me, that makes me feel like it's an us and them scenario, where I'm saying, well, actually, I feel like this is my club, and I feel like I've actually got just as much, input, say, emotional connection, ownership as you have at this club. And if I feel like somebody's saying to me, well, I'm going to make this decision irrespective of what you think, I do feel like that they've almost put that divide down. Now, it's not, you're never going to get somebody who thinks the same as a fan in that position. It's just not going to happen. I say it's not going to happen. The chances of it happening are minuscule. You know, there are owners, when you look back in history, in other clubs, who you probably would still, after their whole time as an owner, you'd probably still describe them as a fan.
Yeah.
You think of like Wigan, maybe even you could say the same at Villa, and you could probably say there's a handful of clubs where people have been in charge for a long period of time, and their stance as a fan doesn't appear to have been affected by the amount of money that they own and the amount and the business decisions that they have to make. But I think that, you know, the chances of having somebody take over a football club or own a football club who genuinely thinks the same as a supporter is nigh on impossible.
Yeah, of course.
So I think the only way to have a situation whereby decisions that are taken have a genuine supporter consideration behind them is to have genuine supporters genuinely involved in a genuine conversation with whoever it is that owns that business. And if that conversation can't be genuine and it can't be two-way, and there is a divide, you're never going to get supporter-centered decisions, and you're just going to end up, you know, alienating the fan base and making people feel how they do feel at the minute at the club.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I also think that, particularly when you're talking about owners of football clubs, it's not necessarily right to obviously ask an owner to behave like a fan and spend as much money as they can to improve the team as we'd all like. But there are owners that have bought into the ethoses of certain clubs. I think Leicester City is the biggest one. Obviously, Unfortunately, their owner passed away, but he was very much, he didn't have any affiliation with Leicester, but his ability to buy into what they were about, to support the fan base, to understand their value is what endeared him to the fans, and equally has sort of allowed that club to escalate and improve. And there might even be an argument that they wouldn't have gone on to have done as well as they have if they hadn't have had that. So it does show that the value of the fan voice isn't necessarily just about speaking to them about certain things. It's about inclusivity and, you know, a level of transparency. And, you know, I might be speaking on my behalf here, but I feel that there is really a lack of transparency in some of the decisions that are made at West Ham at the moment. And I think that's incredibly frustrating. I mean, sort of looking at the outside in, transfers, that's one of the biggest things. You know, every single transfer window, we've got no money, and then no one can really quite understand it. And I think West Ham fans in that respect feel like we're being sort of lied to. And if there was a bit of honesty about it, I don't think you would see a difference in approach. So I do find it frustrating why they can't sort of take that transparent line, and perhaps they would bide more time with the fans, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you say about owners who have bought in, or who have at least been seen to buy into the importance of the relationship with the fans. So I think, football is a unique business where you don't have to do that, and you probably still make almost as much money, or on the face of it, you'll make almost as much money. So you can ultimately treat supporters pretty much however you want in football, and they will keep coming back. I mean, my cousin is from Coventry, and he's a Coventry City fan, and he will still go this season to St Andrews, and he hates it. He hates.
Yeah, I forgot they'd taken residency there. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so they're kind of in almost a worse situation than us, whereby even the ground that they were renting, they're not allowed to play in now. Right. But he's still paying his money. He's still going there to watch them at a ground that he doesn't want to go to, under ownership that he doesn't like. They've completely destroyed that club. And if that happened in any other business, customers would walk away. Now, of course, some do in football. And I think this is what people who at least appear to put the customer, at least appear to put the customer first, they may well have realised that actually, even though in football it's a fairly safe bet that people will spend with you, there is still, I think, some benefit, even if it's even if it's not genuine, even if you didn't grow up as a supporter of that team. When you take on that business, there is benefit in you working with the customer, as there would be in another business, because as we've seen in this pandemic, even if you're trying to sell your club as a product, even if you're trying to sell your club as a brand, even if you're a cold-hearted business person, you're not selling the same spectacle if you've got an empty stadium. So whether it's driven by, whatever you're driven by, whether you're driven by money, or whether you genuinely like seeing the fans at your club happy, I think both of them actually, in the end, do dovetail and do lead you down, or should lead you down the same road. Even though these fans will come back and pay their money no matter what, if you look after them, you actually get a better spectacle or product or brand at the end of it than you would do if you just treat them a bit like we're treated, as people who will just keep coming back and pay their money.
It's bang on, really. I think obviously touched on it in terms of biding them time, but equally, yes, West Ham, we hear them trying to make West Ham a brand, and that's obviously been something that's been pushed quite heavily since we've moved. If you have a stadium full of West Ham fans that are supportive of the club, supportive of the stadium, they would have been able to foster that a lot quicker. And in some respects, it feels like that there's been a massive oversight. And one sort of different aspect to it, but one thing that stands out for me in terms of image is when we look at the investment in the club, particularly with things like the training ground, and you're trying to build a brand, you're trying to build West Ham to be a big club, and ultimately the training ground hasn't been developed, isn't as good really as it should be for a Premier League side. And there's been loads of journalists come out and say exactly the same thing. It seems very cheap. It all seems a little bit cheap to try and, it's sort of a show front and then there's nothing behind. And, even with the signings, there could be an argument with people like Sebastian Haller and Felipe Anderson that were they the right fit for West Ham? Have they been brought in because we've spent £45 million, 40 million on a striker or a midfielder? And, it's such a shame because West Ham's got such a huge spirit and a huge soul to it. And obviously we left Upton Park and that was a massive part of that. But it's also about sort of harnessing the fans and, building a club. And it is really frustrating at the moment. It just feels like we're not the club we used to be, and we've done nothing wrong at all in that respect.
Yeah, I think a couple of interesting points there. I mean, the potential at West Ham is phenomenal. When you look at the amount of fans that we can draw in on a match day, and the kind of, I mean, I was shocked actually. I did not know that this was the case until I found it in an article recently. But one of the justifications that Karen Brady gave for the move to the Olympic Stadium was that when she took over the club, she felt that it had no culture. And I would describe I would have said West Ham is one, has one of the richest cultures in history in the UK, and it's such a exciting prospect for anyone who really wanted to come in and do a good job. And you talk about you talk a bit about that branding, and you look at a club like Liverpool, who I have no doubt that the owners of Liverpool are as keen, if not keener, on branding as our owners. I'm sure they're not stupid. I'm sure they know that they can make good money in the Far East, and I'm sure the owners of Liverpool know that. But the Spirit of Shankly are a really well represented fan group. They have a genuine connection with their owners. We all remember that protest they did over the prices, and when they got a mass walkout at Anfield. And if you look at their branding, they use their relationship with the supporters and the cop, and you always hear the cop, the banners in the cop, the atmosphere on European nights, and they use that to their advantage, and it just shows, if you're willing to either genuinely or half genuinely put fans at what the center of you do, or what the center of what you do, you will get a positive outcome from that as a club. You look at Dortmund as another example, and how they paint their relationship with their fans and their fan experience. And I think it's just very, very, very frustrating that they either A, can't do it genuinely at West Ham, or B, don't even see an appeal to dress it up, so to speak.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you on that respect, particularly with them sort of overseeing the merit of something like a culture in a club. Obviously you touched on it with Liverpool and Dortmund. They're clubs with huge amounts of culture that goes through the entire structure. It isn't just, one element of it or a saying. And I think that's kind of the way that something that really frustrates me, where they kind of cheapen a little bit the sort of key ethos of West Ham. So, when you go around the stadium and you see cast iron this, etc., etc., it doesn't feel like very kind of promotory type terminology, not really something that engages with us as a club. And, when they put up the flags, obviously at halftime and before the game and things like that, to try and give that element of heritage. But we're very astute about our club, and we know what it means to support West Ham, and we know what West Ham should represent. And a couple of flags and a carpet here and there, albeit the carpet has actually made a bit of difference, but it has to be more than that. It has to be with everything, even the football side. And I think that's someone, you look at Klopp at Liverpool, I mean, he's got it bang on. He knows what he wants from his team. And I've got absolutely no doubt that even the players in his squad, as talented as they are, buy into that ethos. And he's bought into that ethos of Liverpool Football Club, and it runs throughout the whole structure. And I would love us one day to have something like that.
Yeah, and another club that I think are doing fantastically well on that front is Brentford. And again, I mentioned it yesterday in the Knees Up Mother Brown podcast. So I just think you talk, if you bring another thing alongside culture, you talk about culture and strategy, and we've probably got neither. And you look at the strategy of Brentford, and you started to talk about some on the pitch things there as well. And they're a club with a strategy, and even if your strategy doesn't work, at least you have one, rather than kind of, we feel like we pick players at random. We feel like we make decisions at random. We feel like sometimes some of the things that happen to the fans are done at random. But to pick up on your point about culture and perhaps where that comes from, I think, it's a bit of a friend, but people do say that fans are a football club. And I think really that your culture comes from your supporters, and so a way of maintaining that culture, because you don't necessarily have to build it at West Ham, you have to actually try and maintain what was there before.
Yeah.
A way of maintaining that is to put the fans at the center of what you do, because fans study that culture, they feel that culture, they live and breathe that culture. They have that emotional connection. So take any example that you could think of that you would say has damaged our culture. Let's just say the badge. Changing the badge, if you do that as purely a business decision because you think it's a fantastic idea to put London on it and it's going to develop the culture of the club, but you haven't listened to the supporters, you're not going to achieve that. The supporters will tell you what the badge should be, because supporters understand the culture of the club, and they will then help you to maintain that culture. And, you know, you mentioned some of the decor and some of the things that are involved in the match day experience, and sellers outside of the stand and flags inside the stand. And all you've got to do is ask the supporters, and they will tell you what makes up the culture of West Ham and what we should and shouldn't have. You know, what makes us unique. And eventually I'll come back to it. You know, it's a sad state of affairs, but basically it makes it a better product.
Well, which of course sort of begs the question. If it's interesting, isn't it? Like, you know, sort of in my perspective, it feels like they make out like it's the impossible task to please the fans. What do they want? But really and truthfully, there's a number of fans that are willing to sit down with you, that are willing to be honest about it. And it's so frustrating that they almost like perceive it as criticism of them and take it a little bit too personally. And I think at this stage, it's not about being personal. It's about really kind of wanting some of the club that we had, you know, the Boleyn back. And it's not a hard issue, in my opinion. It really, really isn't. It is just a case of developing that dialogue. You know, no one's asking you to spend millions and millions of pounds. I know we'll probably touch on it, but obviously they're trying to redevelop the stadium and bring the two stands a little bit closer, which I think is long overdue. I think it was an obvious kind of oversight when we first moved in. But there are other gestures that you could do, particularly with the badge. The badge is incredibly frustrating for me, as it is for many others. The fact we've got London on it, when I don't know who was consulted regarding that. And that's the frustrating part, where they put it on there and there's clips of, you know, the owners saying, oh, it'd be like us being West Ham London. Why would we do that? I'm like, well, you've gone and done it. So who's made that decision for starters? That's the other part of it. Where's the level of accountability? Because, you know, I feel like there's a kind of a lack of trust with, you know, West Ham fans being sort of involved in it, because once you start getting people who are privy to these conversations at the level of transparency, of course there's a level of accountability. Whereas the minute you reduce that, it's almost impossible to trace what's true and what's not. And obviously with our kit, 125 years, a huge sort of moment for West Ham, and the crest comes out and it's still got London on it. And for me, that is just bizarre. And, you know, I can't believe for 1 minute West Ham fans would want that on there. I don't, so.
I think it kind of comes back to what you said at the very start when you're talking about an us and them. We as fans do see it as an us and them. And I think the owners of the club also see it as an us and them. And I think they've actually got to the point where they would rather, and this is only my opinion, they would rather drive people away than reach out to those people. You know, you've got thousands of people who essentially will work for free. Like I don't get paid to do this. I'm just a fan, the same as any other fan who talks about the club in their spare time. And you've got thousands and thousands of people who would give you hours of their time to improve their football club. But what you do is you see them, you see that us and them situation, and you almost think that the board are kind of a bit fearful of it and are saying that, well, perhaps maybe the relationship is broken. So I'd rather that we just don't have those supporters, and that we potentially try and get some new supporters in, rather than we actually, welcome them and say, come on guys, like what we need to fix this. We need to fix the culture at our club. What can you do to help us? And sadly, I think it's probably gone beyond a point of no return with the current ownership. I mean, again, that's only a personal opinion, and if our membership ever instructs us that they feel that has changed, then of course the group stance will change, because we're not a protest group, we're not a GSB out group, we're an independent supporters group. So, as our members decide our stance. But my own personal feeling is, as just an individual, as just a fan, is that I think it's beyond the point of no return. And I think the only kind of solution here is new ownership, and then to start to really work on this kind of fan engagement model with those owners to make sure that we don't end up back in the same situation in 10 years' time.
So with that being said, sort of how do you go into, I don't know the ins and outs, obviously you will, but how do you go into dialogue with the club in that respect? Because you're not taking an aggressive stance. It's not a case of a protest group, as you've said, but with that, opinion, how do you sort of go into a conversation with them knowing that you just don't feel that it's going to work? Is it a case of let's just try and get little things right, or is there still sort of ambitions to obviously have a little bit of an overhaul and maybe even when new owners come in to maintain that level of fan engagement?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I agree that it feels like a juxtaposition at the position that we're in, and but I think there is a way to separate it, and I think it's about understanding the three different levels that we're currently working on. In terms of having a conversation, I'd be more than happy to have a conversation with David Gold, David Sullivan, Karen Brady, and in that conversation, I'd be more than happy to stick to what I think, and I'd be more than happy to explain why I think that. I don't imagine I'll ever get that opportunity, but if I am ever in the room with them, I will certainly tell them that I'd like them to leave the club and the reasons why I'd like them to leave. But in terms of our position as a group, we're kind of working on three levels at the minute. So first and foremost, I guess, is your bread and butter for an independent supporters association, and that is to try and improve operational matters at the club, day-to-day things that affect people's experience as a supporter. So you've touched on the season ticket renewals. So that's one thing where we have done and we will continue to do our best to try to affect an operational decision by the club that affects the day-to-day running of the club for the supporters. Now, we can do that whether we're in protest or not. I understand your point that we're kind of seemingly working with someone who we also don't want to work with.
Yeah.
But I think the way that we separate that is that these operational issues, for example, we're working with senior staff in the ticket office and the supporter liaison office, other members of staff at the club, and we're not kind of lobbying the club to get rid of the supporter liaison officer, if that makes sense. We're not asking for a total clear out of every member of staff at the club. So on the kind of lowest level, in the bread and butter level, we want to continue dealing with staff at the club. We want to continue working with the club in the broadest sense of the word, not individuals, but the club. And we want to continue to try to help support in any way that we can on issues that affect them. Then the second level that we're working on is really to try and address this in the longer term. Have you still got me?
I've still got you, mate. You're still going.
Sorry. Okay. So the second level that we're working on is something to try and address the whole issue of supporter engagement in the long term. Do you want me to start that answer again, or do you want me to just pick up from where I was, or?
Yeah, just go from the second part of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the second level that we're working on as a group is to try to do something a little bit more strategic and to put something in place that will hopefully allow other people to do what we're doing now more effectively in the future. So when I talk about that first level being the day-to-day engagement and improving the operational side of the supporter experience and making a fan's day-to-day operations with the club better, what we also need to put in place is a construct that will allow somebody else, not me, somebody else in the future to continue to have that engagement with the club. So the second thing that we're working on is a strategic construct where we can say, this is the model for supporter engagement that we would like at the club. We would like you to engage with a FSA affiliated group, with an independent group. We would like that group to be able to come out and say whatever they want to say after the meeting, X, Y, and Z. And so that's the more kind of strategic level of what we're doing for supporter engagement. But then the third tier is, I guess, what a lot of people joined up because of in January and February, which is organising events, protests, media engagement, and anything really that can help to put pressure on 3 individuals at the club who we would like to leave. We would like Karen Brady to resign or to be asked to leave, and we would like David Gold and David Sullivan to put the club up for sale, and for us to be able to explore other possible owners. So I guess we're trying to separate the different aims of the group by working on those 3 different levels of the day-to-day supporter experience, the strategic concept and the construct for supporter engagement, and then the protest, I guess you would say, against the 3 individuals that we don't want to be at the club.
Yeah, that's quite a clever way of trying to sort of affect change, but sort of maintain that relationship with the club. That's quite interesting. I didn't know any of that, but because obviously the sort of protests are the face of it, and then you've got everything else behind. But in terms of working operationally with the club, are they quite receptive to that kind of change? Are they quite interested to hear your opinion? Because even if at the very top it doesn't sort of filter up, obviously if you're working with them, are they willing to work with you on certain things?
I think they are. I think they... How can I describe this? So a lot of the time what happens is you'll be in a conversation and you'll get positive signs from that conversation, but then the next time you have the conversation, you'll get feedback that you wouldn't have expected based on the initial positive signs that you had.
Right, okay.
So, so you'll talk to someone from the club, an employee from the club, who actually is very receptive, very helpful, is a lot of the time in agreement with what you say, and actually seems really willing to try to make things happen and to work with you and to explore what you're saying. And then as in a neutral perspective, I suppose you've got FSA representatives as well, who are part of those conversations, who also are supportive of what you're saying. So when you have that conversation in the first instance, you do get a positive reception, which makes me think that the employees of the club are quite keen to work with us and are keen to bring about that change. Now, what makes me think that it's the employees who are keen and perhaps not other people who are keen is that sometimes when actions are taken off the back of those conversations, or sometimes when the follow-up conversation is had, it's not always the response that you would have expected if you took the person who was sitting in the room at face value. Yeah. So I guess what I'm saying is that sometimes the responses that come back, we don't feel like we don't feel like that's the person, we don't feel like it's the opinion of the supporter liaison officer, for example. We feel like that's an opinion that they've been asked to express.
I see. So that's quite sort of like a stop-start process, isn't it? So you feel like you're getting somewhere and you're sort of making a little bit of movement, and all of a sudden it's sort of like, oh, right, we are where we are. Yeah, I mean,
and to use season ticket renewals was the perfect example. We had a really positive conversation on the Thursday. We were given assurances, and on the Monday, an announcement came out of the blue without a follow-up conversation and without those assurances being adhered to. However, then when we started to have conversations on the Tuesday, again, the representatives that we were speaking to were helpful, like really, and came across as though they were trying to work with us. So there's there's something where obviously something gets passed up the chain far enough, and then it gets passed back down in a different form.
So I read your statement about on the season ticket renewals, and one of the key points of it was that, like you say, you had consulted them, it was relatively positive, and then they released a statement without you feeling like it kind of been included within that statement. Very bizarre approach, isn't it? I can't imagine how it feels where, something like season ticket renewals where there's such an outlay of money. And we obviously all know the situation with it where, you're being put into a ballot and asking to spend X amount of money. To not feel like you're being listened to in that respect, has got to be even more frustrating than even some of the sort of longer term aims. You know, it seemed like the season ticket renewals was a fairly, I wouldn't say easy thing to resolve, but certainly a thing that 100% should have been consulted with properly before a statement was released. And there can't be no surprise on their behalf when people reacted the way they reacted if they weren't able to engage properly. And I don't know how you feel about the third option. That was all a bit bizarre as well, where you've taken a real hardline approach, and then all of a sudden you've gone, oh, by the way, there's a third option, and almost pretended like that was part of the whole sort of plan. Is it kind of just for you like another thing that you get frustrated about, and you have to sort of pull them up on and say, well, hold on a minute, you know, that's not what we decided. And what's even worse is the way that they say stuff like, we've consulted with fan groups, and you're working hard to genuinely make that change, and then everyone thinks that you haven't done what you should have done. Do you see what I mean? It's it's management,
I agree. It's an odd situation, but I think I think what it probably tells you is it probably gives you an insight as to how supporter engagement has happened over the past 10 years with the current ownership, and it probably gives you an insight as to maybe the way that they thought supporter engagement would continue to work. And what I'm hopeful of is that, you know, I might be completely wrong, but what I'm hopeful of is that this could be different. And the reason I say that is that after the announcement was made, we as a group were very quick to come out and say what we said, to release our statement. I think I was on West Ham Fan TV the next morning, and I'm not trying to point fingers at anyone who's been involved in any engagement in the past, but I don't think that the people who were involved in that engagement in the past would have been in a position to come out and say that. I don't know enough about it, so I can't make accusations, but I have heard talk of things like non-disclosure agreements being signed before certain meetings take place. So, and there's also been talk of individuals having certain connections with the club where it wouldn't be in that individual's interest to come out and say something against the club, and those individuals being consulted in fan engagement meetings. Now, again, I must stress, I'm not making any personal accusations. I don't have enough detail to make any accusations like that. It's just, I suppose I could say that from my point of view, it would be an open question to say, well, why hasn't somebody come out in the past and said exactly what has been said in these meetings? Why has it taken until now for someone to come out and say that, and then for a decision to be kind of changed? I mean, some of the meetings, the subgroups of the OSB, the club didn't minute those, so they didn't have to, but subgroup OSB meetings didn't have minutes, so it was always a bit of a mystery as to, who, if you'd have been in that subgroup meeting, it was like,
exactly, no accountability or reference point.
So I think what the club would like to do, ideally, is probably not to engage with Hammers United or an independent group, and probably to continue to do supporter engagement through a construct that they have created, because I think it's much easier for them to do that. However, thanks to our members, and thanks to the fact that people like you and media giving us coverage and exposure, and we're now privileged to be in the position that we're in, which is we've got a position with a bit of a profile, and because we've got that profile, I'm hoping that the club are now reconsidering and thinking, do you know what, we are going to have to work with Hammers United going forwards, because either way, now that we've got a profile, it's not going to be great if they do they do invite us to meetings, but they don't take on board the suggestions. That's not going to look great, and it's also not going to look great if they stop inviting us to meetings. So I guess I would say thanks to members and everyone really for putting us in the position that we're in, and just fingers crossed, it can be different this time.
See, like you've sort of touched on it, obviously wouldn't know the ins and outs in terms of the previous incarnations that have been there. but I've certainly sort of seen and witnessed people become, actually, it's kind of created that toxic atmosphere where it feels like certain fans are being pitched ahead of others. And I think that's such a bad approach to take. You know, we are all the fan base and we've all got our opinions, and we should all be represented in that respect. We shouldn't feel like someone can represent us. And I think that's why I quite like the stance you take, where it's very, you know, this is what we are, this is what we do. Obviously, there's a level of transparency, and that's why you're sort of developing that trust, and why it will probably just continue to grow and grow. It's probably come, I wouldn't say an unfortunate time, because it did feel like obviously the momentum was working for you. But I can imagine that, given obviously a lot of fan channels have seen it and looking at it, there's likelihood that it will sort of expand over the next 2 to 3 years, and sort of hopefully we can get it moving in the right direction, or see it at least a little bit. And you are right, you are in that position where if they ignore you, it's bad, you know, and they need you in it. They can't really do anything. They have to listen, which is the best position you can be in.
Yeah, I'd agree with you that it has been frustrating at times, and I'll say again, we are just fans. Like we're nothing else. We're literally just a group of fans who've met in different ways, pubs, forums, whatever it might be. And it has been frustrating not to be able to just sometimes almost like just let the feelings out that we have about certain aspects of what goes on at the club, and to try to remain professional when you've got pressure from, you know, your mates essentially saying it's not good enough, you know, it's not good enough, we need to do this, we need to do that, you know, and it's really difficult to try and stay professional and to build that credibility. But we just really hope that in the long term, and however long term that will be, we really hope that it's worth it. And I understand that the pandemic has given the club some breathing space, but at the same time it's given us breathing space as well as a group, because the protests were fantastic and they were building a lot of momentum, but it was we were bogged down in organising protests, because it takes so much time and effort to communicate with everyone prior to the protest, to make sure that you tick all the boxes. It's a really draining thing to do. So we were bogged down in protest mode, and sometimes you know yourself from work and things, when you get bogged down in the day-to-day things that you're trying to achieve, you don't always step back and take a strategic approach on what you're doing. So yes, the pandemic has given the club breathing space, but it's given us as a committee a nice bit of breathing space as well. And we've had some really productive committee Zoom meetings during the pandemic where we haven't had to talk about what we're going to do on Monday, what we're going to do. You know, we've been able to say a bit more like, what's our philosophy as a group? Where are we going long term? How do we feel about this? How do we feel about that stance? So it's actually allowed us to clear up a lot of our strategic thinking, which I know it doesn't get us any further than we were in March, but we might find in 2 or 3 years' time that we have a much healthier position at the club.
This is really a question I really want to ask, because it would be quite interesting to see. But as sort of anticipated, I feel that the protests will gather a larger amount of support and it gets bigger and bigger. Is it conceivable that you could have the 20 to 30,000 fans for a protest? And if so, would you ever compromise your position in terms of, you know, you do the peaceful protest and you walk through, etc.? Would you ever get to a stage if you felt it necessary that things like stadium walkouts would be considered? Obviously, you know, from what you said, it would be something that everyone would be consulted on. But I was just interested to know, because obviously you're saying you've got to manage that, and it probably difficult to manage now. But when you start to get to that level, it's like it's a different ballgame, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that the first thing to consider is the variety of opinions that you have within the fan base, and certainly the variety of opinions that you would have at a home game. So, I mean, I'm guessing here based on the behaviour that I've seen, but I would say our support at away games is almost unanimous across everyone that's there. I mean, I went through a period when we were trying to build our membership of giving leaflets out at every away game, and I mean, over the course of, let's say, 5 or 6 games, I must have had maybe 3 negative reactions from people, and I must have given out thousands of leaflets. And then you look at what we did at Anfield, and then even at Arsenal. I mean, at Arsenal, at very short notice, I went onto Amazon and bought 2,000 balloons, and I just went round and handed them all out, you know, before the game, and no one said anything negative, and everyone, you know, was kind of backing the protest that we asked them to, which was in the ground before the game, and then they supported the team afterwards. But I think at a home game you have a different mix, not necessarily a negative mix, but it's not the same. It's not your same supporter who goes to every away game, but who might not be able to afford to go to all the away games, but can only do the home games. Who might, you know, have other commitments in their life. They might not constantly be on the forums and on Twitter and Facebook, and they might just be having a day out with their family. Or so the challenge for us, first and foremost, to take those protests to the next level, is to make sure that a larger audience understands what we're protesting for, what they're about, and then I guess they'd be more likely to support it. And the other thing that we're conscious of, which is it doesn't mean we wouldn't do it, it's just a balancing act, is that the protests they've got favourable media coverage because of 2 things. Now, one is because of the conduct of the people who've attended those protests, and 2 is because of the number of people who've attended them. So if we were to do something that, let's say we called a walkout and only 5,000 walked out, you wouldn't see it. So it wouldn't get the coverage because, 10,000 people have walked out by 75 minutes anyway at the London Stadium. So, but you know, what we had in our previous protests was something that looked really vast. It looked really well supported, and something where people's conduct, the people who were there, their conduct was impeccable. So the question marks for us before we organise something are: A, is it going to get big enough backing in the in the arena that it's in, and B, are we going to be jeopardising our credibility and jeopardising the slant of the media coverage? So then I guess if you could tick those 2 things off, you're then saying, right, okay, how can we then reach that target audience to make sure they really understand, you know, why we're asking them to take part?
Yeah, and it's like you say, it is that idea of imagery, and that I think if everybody, sometimes it can be portrayed if it's only a certain amount of people doing it, particularly with the stadium walkouts, because I appreciate you're being put into a position where you do want to support West Ham, you do want to watch the game, you're being asked to sort of forfeit that. So it's a huge gesture, and only something that I imagine people would have to feel really, really strongly about something to do. But what we've seen from people like Newcastle fans, where they've tried to, from what I hear, they've tried to sort of get something going, and it's never really mobilised because there's no sort of uniform approach. And even in that situation with Mike Ashley, they all feel the same, and it's just hard. And you know, it's that balancing act, isn't it, between trying to get everybody on board. People want to enjoy the football, people want to be there. It's such a huge ask, but it's just interesting from my point of view.
I think specifically with Gold and Sullivan, not many. Well, I can say statistically, not many people support them, because in the stadium survey, only 1% said that they were doing an excellent job. So statistically, they don't have a lot of supporters, but they don't necessarily have a wide. They don't necessarily have widespread critics among the West Ham support. Now, what I mean by that is that they survive off the back of lethargy sometimes. Now, so what we come up against as a group is people who will say to us, two things would be the main. So the main argument for not taking part in a protest would be either A, oh, what's the point? You're never going to affect it anyway. Which, you know, you might look at the Ashley situation and say that they haven't affected it, although at least he has put the club up for sale. Yeah. So A, they might say, well, look, you're never going to affect it, so what's the point? or B, people will say, well, are they really that bad? You know, they'll say, oh, we could end up with worse, so why don't we just kind of settle for what we've got and try and make the best of what we've got? So I think it's just a challenge to do exactly what you said, which is to get enough people feeling motivated and passionate enough about that subject to get them to actually commit to doing something different on their match day routine. And you know, getting 8,000 to leave the pub early and to make, you know, what was quite a lengthy walk is a massive achievement. But you know, yeah, of course we want to take things to the next level. And if and when the protests do return, it would be great to get a bigger support and something that looks even more spectacular than it did on that day.
Yeah, and you sort of touched on it, but the stadium survey was quite something to see the results on. It was that kind of moment, wasn't it? Really, where everyone felt, hang on a minute, my voice is going to be heard, and obviously they reacted. And that's what you say when you're trying to engage opinion. It is obviously very difficult when you're handing out flyers, you're trying to get people involved. When you see results like that, it just becomes, you know what you're doing. You're like, well, there is a large majority of people that think the same. It's just trying to sort of mobilise that and get that going. But for me, that was one of the things I looked at and went, I mean, that's pretty damning, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think, I just think that the challenge that lies ahead for Hammers United is the same challenge that has done ever since we started, which is to try and unite what was and what probably still is quite a fractured fan base. I feel like every day, with everything that we release, with everyone that we talk to, and, you know, with the work that we continuously put in to try to push home our messaging, I do feel like every day someone in the support does turn around and say, oh, right, yeah, these guys seem to be, you know, they seem to be doing things the right way. And I think we just need to get to a position where we can bring, in an ideal world, everybody under that same umbrella. I know that there are, I mean, it's no secret. There are certain websites and there are certain individuals who get a really rough ride from West Ham fans and who are not popular amongst the fan base. And I would never ask anyone to be friends with someone I didn't want to be friends with. But you know, in an organisation, what you've got to have is you've got to try and have unity behind, you know, one set message, one set cause, whether you like the people that you're standing next to or not. And that's the challenge for us, really. You know, we are an open church, so to speak, and we welcome anyone to be involved and to be part of our membership. And the more people we have on board, and hopefully if we can keep our messaging in line with what those people want, you know, the stronger we get, and the more chance there is that we can do some real strategic change at the club and things that really will improve fan engagement in the future.
It's brilliant, man. I do hope we get there eventually. I feel like we will. I feel like it's a long battle, but we'll get there. Just a quick one, really. I mean, we haven't really sort of touched on football, but let's just have a little conversation. How did you find the end of the season? As stressful as everyone else, I suppose.
Yeah, do you know, I thought we looked all right last couple of games, didn't we?
Calm down a bit.
Antonio sort of came good, scored a few goals. I mean, he reminds me a little bit of Marlon Harewood in a way, where on his day he would be unplayable, and then sometimes you'd watch him and think, well, you'd honestly think I could do better than this bloke out there sometimes. But no, you know, I guess that's what stops someone from being a really, really top level player, is that they don't do it every single game. But when he's on form, he's brilliant. I'm just praying we don't sell Declan Rice. I am just praying that we don't get rid of him. Honestly, the lad is class. If we can just get one or two more seasons out of him, build a team around him, you never know. He is absolutely brilliant, that kid.
Oh, mate, I've sung his praises probably in every single video I've done. But yeah, I was saying in another video, he's absolutely irreplaceable. I mean, what do you do with a guy that's 21? He's an England international. He's played every minute, so he's not injury prone, and he's just consistently getting better and better. One thing that I've noticed is how he's sort of gone from being a centre back when he first came in the team, and now he's almost like a fully fledged centre midfielder. And it's so rare that you see someone, and it could be a lot down to his attitude and his level of maturity, but he just seems to just get better and better and better. And it's like, when does the ceiling come in? He scored a brilliant goal against Watford, and you think, I'll tell you what, if Declan can get 10 goals a season on top of what he's doing, we've got some player. I mean, his price goes through the roof again.
Talking about him getting better, I remember Liverpool away on the first day of the season. It must have been 2 seasons ago up at Anfield, and I think it was his first performance in a defensive midfield role. I'm pretty sure he got taken off at half time. I said to my mate, and I said, he's never going to play defensive midfield again. That's him done. Like he will definitely be a centre half, because he didn't look comfortable at all. One of the things Noble does so well is he receives the ball with his back to goal in those little positions where he goes in and picks it up off the back foot, and he never gives it away. And Rice didn't look like he wanted the ball that day against Liverpool. He didn't look comfortable coming to receive it in those areas. But the way he's developed his game since then, it's absolutely phenomenal. And another time I went to, I won't say which club this guy works for, but I went to meet a mate of mine who's a scout for a top club in the Premier League. This was a little while back, so it's nothing current, but he'd been sent to watch Declan Rice. And I said to him after the game, what do you think? And he said, yeah, he's phenomenal defensively, ticks every box in that aspect. But he said he doesn't drive on. He doesn't. He's not quick enough to transition from defence to attack. That conversation was probably a year and a half ago, and now he does drive on. Like he's added that to his game. He goes past people. Maybe he's even shot a bit too much recently. But some of the some of the crossfield balls he plays now, and some of his transition. He's a complete player. And I think I'm going to say when he goes, because I think it probably is only a matter of time. But when he goes, it will just kind of bring me back down to earth and remind me that no matter who we produce from our academy, if they're too good.
Oh, don't even go there. It's going to be. I've got a real worry that at the end of next season, Noble could retire and Declan could leave, and I think that'll finish me off, because it's sad. I mean, it's such an interesting one with Declan, because a lot of the older fans do remember the likes of Rio and Lampard and Joe Cole coming through, and I'm gutted obviously wasn't there to see it. But
do I count as one of the older fans then? Because I remember them.
No, that's what I'm too young. I'm too young. So just get my granddad to tell me about them.
37.
Oh,
37, no. You see, mate. I can still remember.
I must have missed the golden era by about, I don't know, 3-4 years. So when I supported West Ham, we was in the Championship just coming up. So my first team I remember, I think of fondly, is Marlon Harewood, Matty Everington, Yossi Benayoun. Like that season, I just remember it. And I thought getting to an FA Cup final was sort of half normal. Obviously it weren't. But yeah, no, Declan is, we've seen a few come through. Obviously Jack Collison and James Tompkins, and solid players really, but nothing on the level that Declan's at. And, I always ask the question, is Declan as good as like the likes of the Rios that come through? And it's tall order. I mean, they were world class in their prime, but I think Declan's going that way. And I think what is kind of super impressive about him is he's at that level at 21. I remember when he first, not the Burnley game, I think it was literally the season after, where he come on at Old Trafford and he come on for 20 minutes. He was just brushing the ball around. He didn't look phased, nothing. I thought, you're like 18 years old and you're just sort of playing along like it's an easy game. And you've seen that clip from West Ham put out when his mates were going like, "Are you not scared? You're not scared of Pogba and Fernandes?" He was like, "I'm not scared of them." But that's the mentality we need. And we saw him become our captain for a little bit. And I think he was pivotal in those games. I think in some respects, he drove us on.
No, he is brilliant, and I think he probably will compare to the Carrick and Cole and Ferdinand kind of era and the success that they had. I think he doesn't necessarily get the credit that he deserves for his technical ability as well. His technique is fantastic. I saw I think it was a little clip of him with the F2 freestylers, possibly.
I was going to tell you about this. Yeah. Mental, isn't it? That's crazy.
They ping the ball over into him and he does it first time. He puts it in the little goal on the opposite side of the pitch first time. And I think he's got everything. sadly, I think he'd be a really good fit for Man City. And I just hope that we don't let him go this summer.
Well, that's the thing, mate. I think obviously we might be lucky because obviously I think Jadon Sancho's going to Man United. Like they're quite close to trying to get that done. Chelsea have spent a lot of money on different players. The only sort of hope I have with Chelsea is they got Kovacic, Jorginho, Kante. I can't see him getting rid of him. And if they brought Declan in, they'd be bringing him in as a centre-back, which obviously he's comfortable there because that's his first position. But we might be lucky to have him for another season, I think. But once you get past that, it only takes, I don't know, Fernandinho's still going at City. When he eventually goes, Declan's perfect. He's just improvement. And I hate saying it because I don't want it to happen. I really don't. But if you just look at football...
It's
football,
like we're trying to get in the transfer move.
No. It's awful because I say it and I'm like, it'd be good at... But I mean it. It'd be good at every team. You get into a top team. But when you look at people like Guardiola that sort of take players on, because you sort of feel fond of him now, don't you? You think, Declan, he's done really well for us and all this stuff. But listen, I think I like to say if he goes, because I just hope he don't go, but it's going to be one of them Groundhog Days, isn't it? Where we don't know how much money we're going to get for him. It's going to be huge. As long as we invest that right, it'd have to be one of those ones where you get quality players across the pitch, not just, little deals here and there, because one of the key issues I had recently, or not recently, but recently in history, is when Payet left. And Payet must have been best player in Europe easily, he's in the Ballon d'Or list and all this kind of stuff. Sold him for 25 mil and then brought Robert Snodgrass in. Now, I know Snodgrass puts a shift in, but, I would have thought we would have, tried to have got a player of the same ilk. So, yeah, really wary of that.
Comes back to strategy, mate, without starting the same conversation again,
Yeah. Transfer strategy, yeah.
Yeah, unfortunately, yeah. We get him off Championship Manager, don't we? So I just, we've only got one scout. So
that is the most mental thing. I think the transfer strategy is the thing that gets everyone, because I honestly didn't know how bad it was. We sort of, over the past 10 years, have had random signings, and obviously Sullivan and Gold with their striker options has been appalling. But, the more it goes on, the more you think, yeah, but we as fans, we can see the issues. Fullbacks, maybe another midfielder. We've only got 2 strikers up front, get another 2 of those in. And it just doesn't seem to happen. And even in this transfer window, you've got Eze from QPR, you've got Ben Rama out there. Obviously, Matty Cash is... I think Burnley bid for him, and it's someone I did a video on, and I was like, it's a no-brainer. And you watch these players and you think, why are we not going out? And another thing as well, you've got clubs going, we'll spend this amount of money here and this amount of money here, but we've been told we've got no money. And I find that really odd. We're all in the same position, but some people have just got a bit more than us. It just worries me, really, really worries me, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree. And the signings they just don't seem to join up in any way, shape or form, do they? They just seem to be a bit random. And what was revealing for me was the story that Allardyce told. I don't know if you heard where he came out and said basically someone that he'd never watched, didn't know, would turn up at the training ground one day and he'd be told that was his
good signing, yeah.
Yeah, and that basically he'd better play him. And if that's the strategy at the club, then I'm afraid there is no strategy, and it's just going to continue to be random signings until perhaps we get a director of football maybe that knows what they're doing.
Yeah, mate, and yeah, you look at Brentford. And we touched on it earlier how good they are. It was my mate the first time he went, Brentford's scouting system's unbelievable. And you go through the list, sell Mopé, get like 20 mil from him, bring like Ollie Watkins in. Ben Rama's from like Nice or whatever, it's crazy. And this is the thing that gets me so much. It's like, none of these clubs have massive outlay. They're not going, we'll get Anderson for 40 mil. They'll get a player in that they've identified, scouted for 2-3 years, and then go and make a massive profit and then use that and reinvest. I'm not saying it's simple, because obviously I'm not in that kind of field, but it does make you wonder, doesn't it? Like, it is a bit crazy.
Yeah, no disrespect to Brentford, no disrespect to them at all, but if Brentford can do it, why can't West Ham? If Brentford can do it, West Ham should be doing it. And I don't think there'd be many people that would argue with you if you were to say that West Ham were a bigger club than Brentford.
Yeah, exactly, mate. That's just what's so frustrating as a fan. I don't know are you going to get in on the transfers, try and sort their strategy out, try and help us out a little bit? Can you sign some younger players and a right back and all that kind of thing? Yeah, it's going to be.
When I said we need a director of football who knows about football, mate, you don't need me. You need someone in.
just to force it, and then let someone come in. But yeah, cheers, Andy, mate. Really appreciate you coming on. It's a good eye opener for me as well, sort of hearing about it, and I'm sure other people will be, interested to hear about what's going on. And best of luck for the future. And obviously, got my full support, and I hope we finally sort of make that change that's going to help the football club out. Really.
No worries, mate. It's been a pleasure. Thanks very much for having me on.
No worries. Take care, fella.
Cheers, mate. Take care.